Good morning. In an effort for us to keep our promise to never forget the lives that were lost on September 11, 2001, I'd like to take this opportunity to remember the lives that were lost on September 11, 2001 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., in New York City. This morning, while I'm sure all of us were thinking about the event 16 years ago, as we were on our way driving to work, there were 322,000 Pennsylvanians today who were driving to work, and their salaries rely on the oil and gas industry in Pennsylvania. And back in 2012, we tried to expand our opportunity in Pennsylvania to attract a new industry here, to attract the petrochemical industry to Pennsylvania. And those two issues alone, I would think, would serve as the reasons why we should not pass a severance tax today or in the near future. But unfortunately, there are a number of members in this building who continually inch closer and closer to putting a severance tax in place. And so we are joined here today to talk about the consequences of that action. And we are here today to provide some information on why we should not pass a severance tax. If those 322,000 jobs weren't a reason enough, we are going to present some additional information on why a severance tax would be horrendous public policy. When we attracted the petrochemical industry to Pennsylvania back in 2012, we understood that this would bring us a robust domestic source for our Pennsylvania ethane. And we also understood that the petrochemical industry would provide us with the rebirth of the manufacturing industry that we once were a powerhouse. We were a powerhouse for the manufacturing industry in Pennsylvania, and the petrochemical industry would provide us with an opportunity to get that title back. The key then, and the key today, is that feedstock, access to feedstock, low-cost ethane, is the most important factor in attracting that industry anywhere in the nation, and anywhere in the world for that matter. The Wall Street Journal article recently said that feedstock is the most expensive factor in where the petrochemical industry will locate and operate. Access to low-cost ethane. That is why the CEO of Shale recently said that access to low-cost ethane and the economic incentives that we put together in Act 85 of 2012 were two of the critical reasons that Shale decided to spend $6 billion in Pennsylvania with 7,500 construction jobs and to put the first cracker plant in the northeast region of this country. Those two critical factors, access to low-cost ethane and the economic incentives that Harrisburg passed in 2012. And if you look at the language of Act 85, you will see that those economic incentives rely on Pennsylvania ethane. The petrochemical industry that we tried to attract here, and by the way, we attracted an entire industry, an industry that includes Exxon, Dow Chemicals, Chevron Phillips, BP, and Royal Dutch Shell. The economic incentives that are available to those companies relies on them purchasing Pennsylvania ethane. And that's why it makes no sense to put another severance tax in place. And I say another severance tax because the impact fee is essentially a severance tax. It makes no sense to put another severance tax in place that will arbitrarily raise the price. Government will be arbitrarily raising the price of that ethane that is the most critical component of that industry. And it'll drive out the producers. Those that are producing the ethane in the Pennsylvania Utica Shale, it will drive them out like we've already been seeing. And so I know the critics will say, Jim, but Pennsylvania is producing a record amount of gas. What are you talking about that they're going to somehow leave? Folks, it's important to remember that those production numbers, when you hear Pennsylvania is the second largest producer of natural gas in the world, okay, that's true, but that is talking about methane, and that is in the dry gas region of the Marcellus Shale. The petrochemical industry relies on ethane, which relies on the wet gas Utica Shale in western Pennsylvania. But that ethane is also 10 miles from the cracker plant in Ohio, and it's also in the Gulf Coast. And so when people say, well, Jim, they're gas producers, they're not going anywhere. We hear that all the time here. Oh, they're not going anywhere. Those people need to wake up, and they need to look at updated numbers, because what they will see is that the active rig count in Pennsylvania is down by 75%. They'll also find that the active rig count in Ohio is up over 100% since last year. And they'll also find out about this other shale development, this other basin that is in play, the Permian Basin, where they have increased their active rig count by 211 since last year alone. So the people that don't think that this industry is mobile and they won't pack up and leave, they just aren't paying attention. Now, earlier this year, the Atlanta Falcons were said to have blown the greatest opportunity in Super Bowl history. And in my opinion, the greatest opportunity to reclaim the title of a manufacturer leader in this country will be blown if we pass a severance tax. And here's why. We will blow an opportunity to attract companies like Dow Chemicals. Dow Chemicals, they are going to invest $8 billion in their petrochemical facilities in this country. They're putting $8 billion into this industry that we're trying to attract here. And they're not spending a dime in Pennsylvania. They're spending all $8 billion in the Gulf Coast. Exxon will spend has announced they will spend $20 billion more in their petrochemical facilities in the United States, including the largest cracker plant in the world, which will cost them $9.3 billion. They're spending zero in Pennsylvania, in spite of the fact that we have the same ethane, in spite of the fact that we have the Pennsylvania Resource Manufacturing Tax Credit that would be available to them. In spite of those two things, they're spending $20 billion in the Gulf Coast. Braskem, a company that has their North American headquarters in Pennsylvania, decided to leave Pennsylvania for their petrochemical facility, and they're going to invest nearly $700 million in the Gulf Coast. And so while there is a lot of excitement about the progress being made on the Shell cracker facility, let me be clear that if we wreck the ethane supply with taxes and regulation, we risk every petrochemical opportunity in this state, and we continually will see investments go to other places in this country. Our victory lap needs to end, and we need to work together to attract more investments in this country. In this country, but also in the state of Pennsylvania. And if you want to know why all those companies are investing in other places other than Pennsylvania, I want to tell you why with one quote from a recent Wall Street Journal article. Petrochemical companies are betting the price of feedstock will remain low for years to come. That's why they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars into this industry in this country. And the fact is that Pennsylvania is just not a safe bet for those companies right now. And how could it be? When you look at our permitting operation in Pennsylvania, to get a permit to move earth in Pennsylvania, in the southwest region of the state where the cracker plant is and where the Utica Shale is, it takes 268 days to get a land disturbance permit. In Ohio, it takes 30 to 45 days. How can we be competitive when well permits take 103 days on average in Pennsylvania, but they take 25 days in Ohio, 24 hours in some cases in Texas? It's been well documented that Pennsylvania has the highest corporate net income tax, higher than Ohio, obviously, Texas doesn't have a corporate net income tax. We have an impact fee that charges the natural gas industry exclusively, only applies to natural gas industry companies, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The permitting cost alone since I got to Harrisburg went from a $100 fee to a $5,000 fee. Pennsylvania is not competitive. But the good news is that this industry is going to spend $185 billion in this country. There's 310 projects that will create 460,000 jobs in the next decade. If we get our act together and we come together like we did in 2012, and we work together with labor and industry, Democrats and Republicans, we can use our tools, our God-given natural resources, the petrochemical tax credit that we put in place, and we can start to bring companies back to every region of this state. And when you look at this chart and you see that we're not just talking about the individual cracker plant facilities, we're talking about a manufacturing industry that will boom. In fact, the CEO of Dow Chemicals recently said that the petrochemical industry will feed the manufacturing sector. Don't take Jim Christiana's word for it. Take the CEOs of the biggest companies in the world that are saying that with cracker plants, with petrochemical industry investments, come downstream manufacturing jobs. And we can have it in every county in Pennsylvania. This is not a regional fight. This is not about political agendas. This is about bringing jobs to Pennsylvania and fixing our lack of competitiveness. There is one person up here who, before he was the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, Gene Barr, who's now the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, had a distinguished career in the energy sector. And he knows all about the efforts in 2012 we did to help attract this industry to Pennsylvania, because he was standing on this stage working with people that he doesn't always see eye to eye on public policy in the name of job creation. And so I'd like to ask Gene to come up and offer a few words about the severance tax proposal.
Thank you, Representative. Good morning. Thank you, Representative Christiana, for pulling this together, and thanks also to the other members of the House, including Speaker Torzai, who are here on this very important issue. Yes, my name is Gene Barr. I'm President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're the largest broad-based business advocacy group in the Commonwealth with roughly 9,000 members. And yes, that includes members who explore for energy in this Commonwealth, who move energy in this Commonwealth, and particularly those who use energy here, and sometimes a whole lot of energy, which is why we've expressed such serious concerns over the proposal that is in front of the House at this point. Representative Christiana touched on some of this, and I have to say this issue of how we tax the industry is interesting. It's more than fair amount of misinformation, and Representative Christiana touched on a number of things relative to that. People will say, well, Texas has a severance tax. As he noted, Texas does have a severance tax. Texas also has no corporate net income tax, where ours is 9.99%, the highest effective tax rate in the United States. The other misinformation, well, the industry doesn't pay any taxes. Let me assure you, the industry pays significant taxes, not only the income tax or fee or whatever you choose to call it, and now we're going to look to impose a separate severance tax, but the industry, for those who are incorporated as C-Corps, pay 9.99, as well as all of the other taxes that businesses incur by operating in any given Commonwealth. The other one, well, you know, these companies have to be here, the gas is here. Let me tell you, as Representative Christiana noted, capital is fluid. I've seen it from my own experience that capital will move because companies need to make that return. It's just the reality of the situation. The other thing that I've heard is, well, you know, the companies will stay here because they're making money elsewhere. So they're willing to lose money in Pennsylvania in order to make money elsewhere. And the analogy I've used with people is assume that you've got a 401k and you have 4 different accounts in your 401k. 3 of them are doing pretty well and 1 is absolutely doing terrible. You don't make the assumption, well, my other 3 are making money, let me keep that one. If they cannot get the return on the billions of dollars that they employ in this Commonwealth, these companies will leave. And as Representative Christiana noted, we're seeing a decline in the drilling counts. There are other places to get natural gas. There are other places to invest. And in fact, as we've noted, some of them are oftentimes easier to deal with. Pennsylvania's topography can be very difficult. Permitting issues here, as you've heard many times, are very difficult. And we appreciate the fact that the Senate recognized that in this proposal. Clearly, we have an issue with the proposal itself in terms of taxing largely one industry in order to get at a common good. And we understand that there are issues out there. Pension costs have tremendously escalated what this Commonwealth has to pay, well into the billions. And we understand all of those. But we're recognizing, and we recognize and appreciate the fact that the Senate has seen that permitting needs to change here. The problem is that much has happened when the impact fee was assessed, and there were changes put into that that would bring some reasonableness to Pennsylvania's permitting. Those were struck down by court. And I think the industry, to be honest, is rightfully concerned that adopting and going along with this, that much of the same could happen as well. Now, let me just close with this, because I think this is something that certainly was driven home to me a short time ago. Back a few months ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Israel with a group as part of a U.S. Chamber trade mission. And I was one of 12 state chamber presidents who went with the U.S. Chamber on that, and it was a tremendous experience to listen what's going on and hear what's going on in that particular nation of Israel. But 2 different times on that trip, I was told by people who said, yeah, we're really interested in investing in the U.S., and we're really looking at New York and Boston. And I said to myself, what's wrong with the Commonwealth where I was born? What is it in Pennsylvania that says we're not that attractive for investment at this point from other countries? What do we need to do? And to be honest, it's something you're going to hear our organization articulate even harder, because it was not the first country I've heard that in. Quite literally, the same 2 cities were named, the same 2 states were named as targets of investment. So what is it we're doing or not doing? And we have to address that as a Commonwealth and have much bigger discussions over what strategy needs to be adopted. But I guarantee you this, they're not coming here, they're not avoiding Pennsylvania because our energy costs are too low. Pennsylvania has a tremendous strength in this industry, and we talk all the time about working on your strengths. We have some tax issues that need to be addressed. The energy industry is an emerging strength for this Commonwealth, actually always has been. We've always been an exporter. Adding natural gas to our historic strengths in coal and nuclear, and what we've done recently on alternative energy, is tremendously significant. We have advantages over other states. Massachusetts, Boston has to import foreign natural gas. We have a tremendous advantage in terms of advocating that and in talking about that. We've got great advantages here. What we cannot do is move to a point by adopting a strategy where we would then tax Pennsylvania's natural gas at 4 different points: at the drilling, at the extraction, at the usage, and if you happen to make money on it, we're going to happen to tax you on the income side as well. Quite a few taxes for people who claim an industry doesn't pay taxes. So thank you for the opportunity. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dave Taylor of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gene, and thanks to Representative Christiana for organizing this event and for all of the pro-growth advocates here on the stage. I'm David Taylor. I'm the president of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. We're the statewide organization that represents the people who make things here in Pennsylvania. And I have to start by saying that to simply adopt the tax hike that is before the House would be a bonehead move. That the severance tax kills off future growth, and in the same way that the gross receipts tax is going to work to kill off the jobs that we have now, and that the answer has to be no. Let me just talk a little bit about the importance of manufacturing. Manufacturing is the engine that drives Pennsylvania's economy. It's the sector that adds the most value and has the strongest multiplier effect on growth. That manufacturing in Pennsylvania sustains over 500,000 jobs on the plant floor and in direct supervision, but that core manufacturing activity sustains millions of additional Pennsylvania jobs in supply chains and distribution networks and in vendors of industrial services. Manufacturing added $86 billion worth of value to the Commonwealth's economy last year. That's 12 or 13% of gross state product, one of the largest contributors. Now, what is it about manufacturing? Well, it's the fact that no matter what it is that you're making, You're going through a multi-stage process, taking raw materials or component parts to yield a finished good. In the course of doing that, inevitably, you are consuming a large amount of energy. For many manufacturers, energy is their #1 cost input. Therefore, to have competitively priced, abundant, available, reliable energy would be a competitive advantage for Pennsylvania, and that is what is at stake here. Furthermore, to get to the point that Representative Christiana was speaking to, that the natural gas byproducts, the ethane, butane, propane, and natural gasoline that are found in the western part of Pennsylvania, those chemicals are manufacturing inputs. We can make stuff out of that. In particular, the cracker plant in Beaver County is going to take ethane, crack a hydrogen molecule off of it, and turn it into ethylene. Ethylene is the precursor of every kind of paint, glaze, solvent, adhesive, and coating, every kind of rubber and styrofoam and plastic that goes into every kind of consumer good that you and I purchase and handle and use every day. As was mentioned, to have those feedstocks in abundance at a very low competitive price is going to be the catalyst for an incredible amount of manufacturing activity, value added, and all of the economic dynamism that would go along with that. That is what is at stake here with this very, very wrong-headed tax plan to forfeit the future in favor of a smash and grab and take it while you can approach now. And when it comes to competitiveness, the cost of creating and keeping jobs here in Pennsylvania versus in other states or other places around the world, all of that depends on the decisions that get made in this building. And this is one of the ways that Pennsylvania's leaders of both parties and across the decades have failed us. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. Going back to 1991, there was a budget shortfall of $1 billion that was closed with a $3 billion tax increase, all of which fell on the business community, on the productive sector, and it condemned Pennsylvania to 2 generations of chronic economic underperformance. Anybody who's seen the population numbers about Pennsylvania should be gravely concerned. We've had economic growth that's only a fraction of the national average. We've had population growth that's only been a fraction of the national average. And now, Pennsylvania last year suffered net population loss. People go where the jobs are. They follow the opportunities. And so if you want a Pennsylvania where you don't have to buy a plane ticket to visit your grandchildren, if you want a Pennsylvania that is actually competing and winning and bringing jobs back from China, we need to claim this energy opportunity and foster in Harrisburg a pro-growth, pro-development agenda, the kind of broad-based bipartisan consensus that folks saw on this stage in 2012, as was mentioned, where Gene Barr and I were up here on this stage with leaders from organized labor, that Governor Corbett was here with County Executive Fitzgerald and other Democrats and Republicans, business and labor, people from the East and people from the West, that we want the jobs, the growth, the prosperity that can come from this industry. We need to give employers, especially our high-value manufacturers, an actual business reason to be here. Not because we have an ad campaign or we offer them some kind of break or subsidy or something like that. We need a permanent change to make Pennsylvania more competitive, and this energy opportunity and the petrochemical manufacturing, that can be the reason that Pennsylvania has the growth and the dynamism that we need and want. There was a voice from officialdom that referred to people like me opposing the tax plan as being a special interest in their own echo chamber. Well, make no mistake, the interest that is being represented here today is Pennsylvania's economy, Pennsylvania's jobs, and the more prosperous future that we should all want. So my advice is, don't do the next stupid thing that's going to cut us off from jobs and growth and prosperity here in Pennsylvania. And with that, it is my great honor to introduce one of Pennsylvania's most consequential most dynamic pro-growth leaders, the Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much, Representative Christiana, and our guests here today. I know other colleagues, as well as members from the business community, have taken the time out of their busy schedules to speak about this important issue. When Jim asked me yesterday to attend, I thought it was important, given the folks that I know back home, to put my perspective out here in the public, as I have for many years. As you know, I've been steadfastly opposed to a severance tax for as long as the issue has been raised. And many women and men in my district and in districts throughout the southwestern part of Pennsylvania are employed directly by employers in the natural gas industry, but they're also employed by folks that service that industry or the people in Pennsylvania that are part of that industry. Electricians, welders, sales folks, engineers, water specialists, commercial real estate, architecture, architects in the architecture area, contractors of many stripes. It has been, particularly after the economic recession in 2008, it is a very significant part of what has allowed people to have family-sustaining jobs. And these are good people, people who pay taxes, people who contribute to YMCAs and Little Leagues and churches, synagogues, and mosques. They are people with good family-sustaining jobs. They are many people who are from Pennsylvania. Sometimes ask what the amount of money that is spent on Pennsylvania businesses as vendors alone because of this industry. There are startups as a result of the development of this industry. And I'm convinced, just in talking to my friends and neighbors, that this tax in any form are going to put their jobs at risk. Many of you may know, I know the Shale cracker plants coming into Beaver County, where Representative Christiana is from. But Shale also had a corporate presence in my district, not far from where I live, and there are about 150 jobs. A little over a year ago, they picked up and moved those 150 jobs to Houston. And the Shale corporate presence on that front left, in large part because of some of the punitive approaches that they have seen in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Losing those people, many good people, was sad, and they didn't want to leave the Pittsburgh area. They really liked it. In addition, it's not limited to southwestern Pennsylvania. In my first term as Speaker, we went across the Commonwealth. In Oakdale, I was out there with Representative Christiana, Representative Mustio, and others. That's near Allegheny County, Washington County border. We heard about the jobs that were being created. We were in Lancaster, PA. There's no drilling going on in Lancaster, PA, but there was a lot of job growth as a result of the development of natural gas, including Ritu Engineering. We were at Dorabon for a press event here in Stilton near Harrisburg. They opened up a manufacturing facility that had been closed and started to build pipe for the industry. We were up in Lackawanna County talking to employers in La Plume, Pennsylvania, and how it had changed really changed the face of the economic opportunities in the northern part of the state. And finally, we were at Marcus Hook in Delaware County. And Gene, because I know you're originally from Delaware County, but originally, what's the term when you're bringing in crude oil from Nigeria? They were using that pipeline.
Well, it was delivered by ships, and then they were shipping by pipeline finished product out west.
Out west. And then they reversed that
They
pipeline.
reversed it, correct.
That was Sunoco Logistics, right?
Correct.
And they're now bringing natural gas
Absolutely.
to Marcus Hook in Delaware County on the Delaware River.
Absolutely.
And good family-sustaining jobs there, too.
Correct.
And many trades jobs, right? Building trades jobs.
Thousands.
Yeah.
Thousands.
I mean, these are people who are taking care of their families, folks. And I'm just convinced this tax in any form is going to put those jobs at risk. That's what I think. And it's going to thwart the growth of any new jobs in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Just yesterday, Stacey Olson of Chevron and Morgan O'Brien of People's Gas, they did an op-ed, an opinion piece, in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Sunday paper yesterday. And I'm just going to read one quote. "We believe it's time to focus on economic growth as a central driver of the solutions Pennsylvanians need and want. We are literally standing on an unprecedented, once-in-a-century opportunity to generate the kind of economic growth that can move us from talking about our problems to acting on solutions." And they are talking about Pennsylvania being a leading U.S. and global natural gas producer. That's what they're talking about in their op-ed. If you have time, you should talk to Stacey Olson or Morgan O'Brien someday. They're passionate, and they care about the people that they employ, and they want to expand their operations in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now, just for some facts, what's in front of us. As Speaker, I have to be aware of these and focus on them. Of course, you know the governor's identified the imposition of a severance tax as his #1 agenda item, and that began in the 2014 campaign. And in this past July, the Senate passed a severance tax along with taxes on natural gas and electric consumption, as well as telephone communications. Now, here in the House, of course, that severance tax bill is over in the House now, but also in the House, there has recently been filed, it's a technical term called a discharge resolution. If a bill has not moved out of committee, 25 members can sign a discharge resolution. And Representative Mike Hanna filed on July 11th of 2017 a discharge resolution with respect to a bill in the ERE committee, Energy and Environmental Resources Committee. And it is a Representative Kate Harper bill, House Bill 113, that would impose a severance tax. Now, the way the rules work, there are 2 days, 2 legislative days after the filing of that discharge resolution when it may be called by any of the signers of that discharge resolution up for a vote. The first day, it was filed on July 11th. The first day was July 20th. Today will be the second day. If and when any of those signers call up the vote, of course, there will be a vote on that discharge resolution. I and many of my colleagues will be steadfastly opposed to such a discharge resolution, just as we are to the severance tax vote itself. And I think it's misguided, but a vote's going to be in front of the House likely if one of those signers call up such a discharge resolution. And I think everybody has to understand the jobs that are at risk. I'm honored that Representative Jim Christiana would have put this together. He did this on his own, but he's been a leader in pushing for jobs in Western Pennsylvania and all throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania since he first came into office. He's just an outstanding legislator, and he cares about people. And that's really what it's about, caring about people. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, thank you for your leadership on this issue. I'd like to call up next Matt Briette. Matt is the President and CEO of Commonwealth Partners, Chamber of Entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Representative Christiana. Pennsylvania has the distinction of being the highest corporate welfare state in the country, both in total dollars and in per capita dollars. This isn't something that we should be proud of because it's really an indication of a hostile business climate in which we operate, that we have to try to lure people to invest in Pennsylvania. The reality is if gas drillers were not already here in Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf and the General Assembly would be bending over backwards, throwing tax dollars at this industry, trying to lure them, their jobs, and lower energy costs to Pennsylvanians through these incentives. But because they are here, and because they've taken this approach that the gas is here, therefore we need to have punitive taxes upon this industry. But I don't think it's because there's a hatred for the industry. It's really because there's an addiction to spending in Harrisburg. And that addiction is driving bad decisions here in our Commonwealth. The problem is that you're not going to tax the industry. At the end of the day, the impact fee or a severance tax or any of these costs, businesses don't pay taxes. Businesses pay zero in taxes. And before Gene and Dave come up and jump me from behind, the reality is only people pay taxes. corporations don't pay taxes, those costs are always passed on to people. It's either passed on in the form of fewer jobs, lower wages, fewer benefits, or increases in prices to the consumers. It's people who will pay for these higher costs of doing business in Pennsylvania. It always comes back to people who are punished by tax increases in Harrisburg. We might be able to say that we're going to do it to the big dogs, the Sunocos and Shells and Exxons and all these folks. But ultimately, it's going to be the working Pennsylvanian that's going to pay these taxes. So it's really time for Governor Wolf and lawmakers to stop targeting job creators and using them as a scapegoat for their overspending, their addiction to spending. It's true gas isn't going to move, but those jobs are in fact moving out of Pennsylvania to more hospitable business climates. It's time we reject this punitive tax that's going to hurt working Pennsylvanians and that we stop driving energy producers to other more welcoming states. Let's make Pennsylvania the place that people are flooding to, no pun intended, coming to invest dollars, create opportunities for Pennsylvanians, and continue to drive energy prices lower. Thank you.
Hi, I'm State Representative Aaron Bernstein. I first and foremost want to thank Representative Christiana for his leadership on this issue, as well as Speaker Turzai and Representative Mustio and the folks behind me today. And I think what we've heard over and over is that this is punitive. And it's a punitive tax that's being proposed, and this punitive tax that's being talked about. See, the problem is it's not punitive towards corporations. And the reason it's not punitive towards corporations is they're just going to leave. They're going to pick up, they're going to pack their bags, and they're going to leave, just like we've seen so many of the wells have already occurred. Who this is really punitive to, and I wanted to just share this very quick story. Who this is punitive to is the senior citizen. The senior citizen in Laurel School District that provides for their children, and they're carpenters or they're welders, and those jobs aren't going to be available to them. This is punitive to the single mom that works very hard at the restaurant that will be closing because that carpenter no longer is able to afford buying food at that restaurant. Every day, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't receive some type of a message, whether that's a phone call, an email, a text message from someone in the oil and gas industry. And the conversations that I have, they're not with executives and CEOs. These are with guys and girls that have calluses on their hands. These are people that work hard for a living every single day. And they consistently ask me and tell me to ask my colleagues to not put additional burdens on this. So I thank the folks behind me that are out there working very hard for those special interests that are called. But just understand, those special interests are not the big corporations. They're not the millions and billionaires. They're the hardworking people of Pennsylvania that require this money to live on every single day.
Before I take questions, I would like to thank my colleague, Representative Mark Mustio, for being here. Mark represents Allegheny County, and Mark, like the Speaker, has seen a major company decline to make huge investments in his district, which would have hired a regional headquarters that would have hired 500 high-paying salaries and a multi-million-dollar expansion. They decided to forego that investment, and they, like Shale's corporate jobs that the Speaker was talking about, also move south. And if this severance tax is about government making more money and is about filling a budget hole, Representative Mustio has seen firsthand in his district how government can work with a company and work with an industry to bring in millions of dollars for their constituents. The Allegheny County Airport, the Pittsburgh International Airport sits in Mark's district, and they partnered with a major producer to bring in revenue for the airport as well as to put folks to work on a natural gas rig that sits on the airport property. And if government truly wants to make money in this endeavor, they don't need to do it by passing another tax. They can work with an industry and partner with an industry to find ways to help make America more energy secure, put people back to work, as well as bringing additional revenue to their constituents. And Mark has seen it firsthand, and also has seen the negative impacts associated with the uncertainty in this business climate. I would also like to mention his attendance, Jeffrey Logan, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Chemical Industry Council, who is with us today. And thank you, Jeffrey, for being here. In closing, I would like to make this request to Governor Wolf and any legislative leaders on any legislative leader on either side of the aisle and either side of the building. If they're interested in working together to grow our economy, to grow jobs, to bring multi-billion-dollar investments into this region of the Commonwealth, I'm here to help. But I'm not here to help slap another tax that has significant consequences and will drive investment away from Pennsylvania and risks the economic benefits that we have already achieved. I asked the governor and the legislative leaders to take this issue off the table. There are plenty of other ways to solve this budget impasse, this budget stalemate, the revenue shortfall that we need to close this budget gap. There are plenty of other options on the table. The consequences of a severance tax would be terrible for the investments that have already been made and will drive away huge opportunities to other parts of this region. With that, I'll take some questions. Yes.
I missed some of your opening remarks, but I mean, you did sponsor a Shale tax bill in early 2015. I think it was 3.5% gradual. So did you actually, I mean, you come around to a different...
Late 2015, I proposed an idea and actually didn't get to a bill, but you're correct, and I proposed a concept that would reformulate and rebrand the impact fee. All along, I've thought that an impact fee is essentially a severance tax. It is an additional assessment on the natural gas industry that no other industry pays. And if we want to change the label of that impact fee to a severance tax and get rid of the impact fee, then I welcome those conversations. And I tried to put a proposal together back in late 2015. What I'll also mention is it's important that when defining a severance tax, it's not just about picking up a rate and dedicating that revenue to some special fund or the general fund. There's a lot of details that matter. A lot of details that still to this day have not been discussed, like capital cost recovery. What do we do when the price of gas is at an all-time high and an all-time low? Are we going to have a rate that fluctuates? Unfortunately, for a number of years, this debate in Harrisburg has been about a 5% severance tax on some mythical production number or estimate and some wild revenue estimate. That's a terrible way to come up with a severance tax proposal. And so back in 2015, you're absolutely right. I tried to figure out a way to navigate this issue by taking the unique impact fee that is unique to no other state has it and try to put it in a more traditional production-based assessment. And one final point that I'd like to make on that is that things have changed drastically, and I think that is important to what you missed earlier was the petrochemicals investments made in other parts of this country, the rig count decline that we have seen in Pennsylvania. We're not talking about 2015 anymore. We have Ohio that any day will have more active wells than Pennsylvania. And you have a Permian Basin that is stealing our jobs and a Gulf Coast that are stealing our petrochemical investments. And so I think that's a big difference from 2015.
Jim, excuse me, I just wanted to add one more thing. I mean, on the part of the advocates for a new additional tax on Pennsylvania energy production, their argument has been that, well, we don't have this particular kind of tax, whereas all of the other states do. Well, couple things that are wrong with that. Number one, it's not about whether you have one kind of tax versus another kind of tax. It's about what is the total cost of doing business in one jurisdiction versus another. But I think more importantly to your question, the fact is that of those states that have a severance tax, that those taxes are that there's an abatement period up front during which the tax is not imposed, so that the investor can recoup the capital spent in drilling the wells. And again, these other things vary from state to state, that they apply to all elements taken from the earth, not just to one particular element. And so my point is, in this way, the severance tax that is being proposed for Pennsylvania does not exist in any other state in the country.
Yes.
I have a question, Mr. Taylor, because 1991, I mean, you were saying that a lot of taxes still on the business community. I was around. There was a PIT tax or sales tax changes. There was a tire rental tax. There was, of course, that very high corporate tax income rate of 9.99%. But it wasn't just on the business community back in 1991.
Well, it was the CNI and the capital stock and franchise tax. And when you look at the number of employers in Pennsylvania that are not C corporations, but instead are LLCs or private partnerships, or pay their business taxes at the PIT rate, those in the computer services tax from back then, which of course Governor Wolf is now trying to resurrect, that was all pointed directly at the business community. It was the U.S. News and World Report at that time said it was the worst policy decision of any state in America. It was ruinous. And again, it fell almost exclusively, it fell primarily on business taxpayers. And we weren't in that great of a competitive position to start with at that time. And it certainly made a bad situation worse. And when Pennsylvania today has an opportunity that it is as transformative as what is before us now, we should embrace it. Again, the petrochemical manufacturing industry that is waiting to be born offers the opportunity of creating value the way the steel industry creates value, because you are making the stuff that other people make stuff out of. I mean, the enormity of this opportunity, the petrochemical sector that is waiting to be born, if it comes to pass, will be bigger than what we have seen by the drilling, by many, many multiples. And that is what's at stake. And that's why this is such a critical hour to stop a bad idea in its tracks, back up, and figure out a better way to get through this current short-term financial situation.
All right, well, let me address your question on 1991, because 1991 I was not in Pennsylvania. I was with one of BP's business units, and it's far enough away that I think I can tell the story I have in a couple places. And I was in a meeting with some of the senior execs, those people who make investment decisions about Pennsylvania. Now, keep it in mind, at the time, BP had in Pennsylvania a fairly large refinery. It processed about 180,000 barrels per day of crude in suburban Philadelphia. They were in the pipeline system. They had storage facilities. They had a series of retail outlets in the eastern part, particularly in Pittsburgh area. They had a series of car care facilities in Pittsburgh, as well as other investments. 1991, when I was in a meeting, and what was communicated, I think the corporate net income tax rate went to about 12.25. The corporate capital stock and franchise tax rate went up significantly. To this day, I remember one of the senior execs saying, that's the end of our direct investment in Pennsylvania. To push back against this, they got to be here. I mean, you could say that then. Well, look at all the people driving automobiles. BP has to be in Pennsylvania. They're gone. So today, when you see a BP station, there's a couple left, that's not a BP direct investment. That's a third party who simply buys the product from somebody else. They may have a small piece in a wind farm because of their interest in alt energy, but by and large, BP's fairly significant investment in Pennsylvania is gone, and that's largely as a result of what was decided in 1991.
Is there any appetite for a that paired severance tax with what the Senate is calling regulatory permitting reforms in the House?
Generally in the House, I can't speak to. I will say that personally and with my colleagues from Western Pennsylvania, what I continually hear is that we're already economically uncompetitive when you look at the CNI and the fact we have an impact fee. By and large, members are supportive of rebranding or reformulating the impact fee and calling it a severance tax. But aside from that, there's not an appetite to slap any higher taxes on this industry. Furthermore, our need for permitting and regulatory reform is exclusive to itself. As I mentioned, I don't know if you were here to hear the difference between us and Ohio, which we are in stiff competition for the petrochemical industry because of their ethane supply in the Gulf Coast. Pennsylvania permits for well permits take 103 days on average, where Ohio takes 25 days, and in Texas takes 24 hours to get a well permit reviewed. In an earth disturbance permit, we take nearly 300 days compared to 30 to 45 days in Ohio. And so from the Utica Shale region, we are already very, very uncompetitive. And the well decline in Pennsylvania and increase in Ohio reflects that this industry is already moving and already making capital investment decisions based on our lack of competitiveness. A severance tax would absolutely be destructive to our economy. And there is a press conference at 11 o'clock in this room that is very important to the people of Pennsylvania and the members that have requested the room. So in fairness to them, if there's any follow-up questions, I think you can track me down somewhere. Thank you.